when I was in hospital, sort of sitting on my bed, just thinking, oh, when I get through this, if I get through this, I just have to promise myself that I'm going to live a life that's more meaningful to me, and I'm going to spend more time with my family and friends and not be glued to emails, and I'm just going to live a much more positive, fulfilled life.
Welcome to the programme. I'm Chris Stafford, and my guest today is Lizzie Carr, who at the age of 25 was diagnosed with stage 2 thyroid cancer that not only turned her world upside down, it also made her question her purpose in life and redefined her priorities. She determined that once her treatment was completed and she regained her strength, she would put aside her corporate career and embark on a mission she decided would be not only more fulfilling, but change the course of her life. So Lizzie took up paddleboarding as a low-impact way of regaining strength and fitness after her diagnosis. She then combined it with a national campaign to rid Britain's waterways of plastic pollution and became the first woman to paddle 400 miles of Britain's inland waterways on her plastic patrol, collecting water samples and trash. This year she became the first woman to paddleboard the English Channel solo. That's 24 miles from Dunganess to Boulogne in 7 hours, while also on plastic patrol. Both of these adventures challenged her physical and mental endurance, and now in remission, Lizzie has become a woman on an important environmental mission. Hi Lizzie, welcome to the programme.
Hello.
Not on a paddleboard at the moment, but you've become very attached to your paddleboard, haven't you, recently?
I have, yes, I have indeed.
And it's one of your favourite activities, so we want to hear about the recent journey, obviously across the channel, but you've done other things too, of course, when you traversed the inland waterways of England as well, on a cause, an environmental cause as well. So you're combining these pursuits, these adventures, with a very worthwhile cause. But let's backtrack a little bit, Lizzie, to explain the story of why you left the job that you did because of cancer, because of being diagnosed, and found this new life, if you will, completely changed your life, and you're checking off your bucket list by the sounds of things.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out, really. Obviously, before my diagnosis, I was on a very sort of textbook track, I would say. I would sort of work really hard. I'd gone to university. I was really ambitious, climbing the corporate ladder. And after my diagnosis, it kind of really forced me to reevaluate everything and question, I suppose, my values and where my life was going. And here I am now, kind of just a year and a half actually since quitting my job, and have achieved 2 world firsts and started my environmental campaigning and just feeling really positive.
Talk us through a little bit that process of when you were in a full-time job, busy executive, and then suddenly you have this health check. How did that come about that it literally changed your life, Lizzie? Talk about that process for us and how you discovered it and the time frame.
So I actually took about 8 months off of work to go travelling. I took a bit of a sabbatical, and it was then really that I started to realise that I maybe wasn't very well, but I hadn't really clicked that anything was seriously wrong. I got back to England, and the plan was to go back into work. I was only taking sort of a short break before I was knuckling down properly into my career and, getting back into it. And it was really about a month after I got back that I went to the doctors and realised that actually these symptoms were far more sinister than I'd ever possibly imagined. I think, I was 25 at the time, and I suppose when you're that age, you really believe that you're very invincible and, the world is your oyster. And I suppose it was at the time. I was having an amazing experience travelling all over the world. But it just completely blindsided me. And I suppose at first I wanted to get back into work. I really craved that sense of stability and familiarity that I suppose cancer had taken away from me. And after about sort of a year back in my job, I remembered a moment from when I was in hospital, sort of sitting on my bed just thinking, oh, when I get through this, if I get through this, I just have to promise myself that I'm going to live a life that's more meaningful to me, and I'm going to spend more time with my family and friends and not be glued to emails, and I'm just going to live a much more positive, fulfilled life. So obviously going back to work and doing the exact opposite of that, I felt really guilty. I really felt that I'd let myself down. And it just took sort of one day, just that snap decision. And I didn't really give myself much of an opportunity to think about it, because if I did, I probably wouldn't have done it. And just handed in my notice, and the rest, I suppose, is history.
Do you mind telling us what the diagnosis was for and what your symptoms were that led you to the doctor in the first place, Lizzie?
Yeah, it was thyroid cancer, which is a very rare cancer, the type that I had, but it's actually most common in sort of young women. And it was actually the illness itself was really well highlighted quite recently by a book called The Fault in Our Stars, which I think is brilliant because it raised a lot of awareness in young women about this type of cancer. But my symptoms really was tiredness, which, could be anything. And I had a lump in my throat, which obviously was a tumour, but I had no idea. Just kind of a fairly innocuous, painless lump. And it was those two things that I thought were completely separate. I thought the physical symptoms were much more that I just got back from travelling, maybe a bit jet lagged, and the excitement of being away for so long had caught up on me. But actually it was far more sinister.
And what kind of treatment did you have to go through?
So I had a full thyroidectomy. So my entire thyroid was removed, and I had my central lymph nodes removed. So it spread. It was stage 2 when it was diagnosed. So it sort of spread locally. So I had the operation to remove what hoped to remove all of the cancerous cells. And then I had radiotherapy afterwards.
How are you now?
I'm great. I'm in remission. I have been for 3 years, I think. So it's looking really positive. I feel really positive. Obviously, you have your ups and downs, but generally I'm in a really good place.
So once you'd recovered from surgery and got past the worst and you got your health back to a place where you could consider physical activity again, Lizzie, what led you to choose paddleboarding and the causes and the missions that you set out on to take on new adventures and change the course of your life?
Adventure definitely came first, and actually the reason I started paddleboarding was because I wasn't fit enough to kind of do anything more high intensity. So when I finished my radiotherapy treatment, I went to go and stay with my dad on the Isles of Scilly, and we just sat on the beach one afternoon overlooking the ocean, and I saw a man on the water, the first time I'd ever seen anybody doing it, paddleboarding. And I said to my dad, God, that looks so relaxing, that looks really wonderful, I want to give this a try. So we walked over to the local sailing club and they lent me a board, and I just went out on the water, and it was brilliant for 2 reasons. One, because it was something that I could physically do that was low impact. It wasn't too strenuous to get to regain strength and increase my fitness again. But actually what I didn't expect, and what was a really amazing part of it, and still is to this day, is kind of the mental benefits of it. It was very calming and almost meditative when you're on the water, and I didn't expect to feel that from it. So those two elements combined, I really just fell in love with it. I really needed that at the time. I didn't realise how much, but it was a lucky find.
Well, clearly this was kind of a spiritual journey for you as well, as you say, meditative, and it fulfilled you in many different ways. But then you had to decide, okay, what am I going to do with this? Now, why did you choose those particular adventures? Because you've combined something that you've now become passionate about and is a campaign in of itself, being an environmentalist.
Well, when I came back to London, where I live, I started to research where I could paddleboard, in a really urban area, and I didn't expect to find anywhere. I had no idea at the time that I could paddleboard on our canals and rivers. I'd just never seen anybody do it. But there was a club that I could go to in London where they did. So I joined that club and started paddleboarding in the evenings, after work, weekends, and it just really for enjoyment. But it was when I came back to London and I was on those waterways, that for the first time I could see how much plastic was in our waterways, in our rivers and in our canals. And it just really struck me. It was just really kind of upsetting, I think, because I was using this place as my escape, my place of peace, and removing myself from like the reality of life, I suppose. And it was just marred by all this rubbish that I was seeing, and it was an eyesore. But I could also I could see the impact that it was having on the wildlife as well. And there was, I suppose, the turning point for me. There was a coots nest that I saw on the Regent's Canal one day when I was paddling, and it was made up with more plastic than twigs, like wrappers, straws, bags, everything. And there were little eggs in there, and it was just this moment where I was so horrified. It was like, it's one thing that this is an inconvenience to me and it's affecting my paddling and my enjoyment on the water, but this wildlife, they can't help themselves, they can't protect themselves. This is our own man-made material, and it is absolutely harming their habitats, and we need to do something about it.
Well, you certainly did that, and that journey was, 400 miles? You started in Surrey. Just give us a picture of the journey that you took there, Lizzie, and the impact that you think your adventure actually had, taking on this cause, if you will, and what you felt you'd achieved at the end of it.
So the idea of the journey really was to highlight the issue of plastic pollution on our inland waterways. There's a lot of attention on the problem globally, which is incredible and really very necessary. But I read a stat when I was kind of looking into this in a bit more detail, that 80% of marine debris comes from inland sources. That's from our canals and rivers. And it just shocked me that there was no one really campaigning and championing our waterways in a positive way, to actually use them more for water sports and engage with them, but also to kind of clean them up as well. So the plan was for me really to paddleboard the entire length of our connected waterways network, our canals and rivers, which started Surrey in England, and it took me sort of up through the River Thames to Oxford, and then from Oxford I went up towards Stoke-on-Trent and Manchester, and ended up finalised it in the Lancaster Canal, just short of Kendal in the Lake District. So it was quite a long distance, but the purpose really was that I would photograph and geotag every single piece of plastic that I saw with my naked eye along that route, which at the time didn't seem, I suppose, probably not such a crazy idea, but when I started doing it, obviously it was a mammoth task, and trying to paddle and take photos of everything you're seeing is really difficult. But obviously you can't really miss a day, because as soon as you do that, your entire study, I suppose, isn't accurate. So I took all these photos, geotagged every single one, and plotted them on a map of the country, so you could see where all the hot spots and the pressure points were by the time I'd finished.
Well, that's an enormous exercise in of itself, isn't it, to do that? Now, I'm curious as to how much you could paddle a day. I mean, that's 400 miles, right? How long did it take you, and did you find that you were getting fitter each day with the more paddling that you did?
Yeah, it took me 22 days, and it was just over 3 weeks, and absolutely felt myself getting fitter every day. Like, by the end of it, I felt really, really strong. I trained a lot before I left, and I felt, it's funny how the physical strength gives you confidence as well. And I really found that was the case for me, that the stronger I got, the more confident I felt, the more, I had these moments when I was, slightly doubting myself. I kind of knew I would get through it. I suppose the real challenge was that it was sort of 10, 11 hours of paddling every day, often against quite strong headwinds. And I was going upstream on the Thames for about 70 miles, which against relentless headwinds, that was really tough. But it was the wild camping every night. So I had all my supplies on my board. I had everything with me. The idea was to be completely self-sufficient along that route as well, and just sort of pitched up every night where I could find a spot. It was just that element added to what I was doing made it really quite exhausting.
Yes, I can just imagine as well, being self-sufficient there. And so you had to stop and shop, or did you have a backup crew that would meet you, or friends along the way?
No, I had ration packs on my board that I took with me. So I had a water bottle that I used that I could refill in the canals and the rivers with a filter on it. So I could and I had a stove on my board as well, so I could just boil the water every mealtime on my stove and basically tip it into my ration packs and just eat the food from there. So I knew how many calories I was getting every day and every meal. And that was basically how I survived.
It sounds like our friends who do offshore sailing and how they have to rely on freeze-dried food and those kind of rations as well. I'm impressed how much you could carry on a paddleboard there, Lizzie, to be that self-sufficient. And obviously it was something that empowered you, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, I would imagine. By the time you had completed this journey, you must have felt renewed in a way that would have helped you in your health, I would imagine, and psychologically and emotionally.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a personal journey as much as an adventure and an environmental one. Like for me, there was a lot of layers to it, and by the end of it, I felt quite lost. I imagine a lot of people say this because you build up so much for something and you channel all of your energy into, a challenge. By the time it's finished, you kind of, I don't really know how I felt. It was just a real mix of emotions. I was obviously really relieved that it was done because I was exhausted and I just needed to rest. I felt so happy that I'd done all of my plastic plotting and I had this kind of evidence there that I could present and highlight the issue that was so important. But also I felt incredibly proud of myself for having achieved that, something that, just a year before hadn't even crossed my mind that I could ever possibly do.
It certainly did all of those things, and I'm really impressed that you were able to do this on your own. And having been on those inland waterways myself on a barge, they are very, very pretty. I mean, really is a fun trip in of itself, I'm sure. But it also made you adventurous. By the time you'd finished, it made you more ambitious, didn't it? Once you got your breath back.
Yeah, I suppose it did in a way. You're right that our waterways are beautiful, and I think that's a really important point to make clear, because you can talk about plastic pollution in our waterways, and I think it gives a sense that they're littered with them, and obviously some areas are, but that often correlates with very urban populations nearby. But we do have some beautiful waterways, and I suppose the point of this is to maintain that and preserve it. And if I can get more people interested in paddleboarding and using our waterways in a positive way, in the very same way I have developed this, I suppose this need to protect them. If other people develop that as well from trying out water sports on our waterways, it can only be a good thing.
Well, it certainly makes it all worthwhile what you did there. But as I said, it made you even more adventurous to take on new challenges. And you've done, as you said earlier, 2 firsts now for women. You've just completed paddleboarding the English Channel, 24 miles from Dunganess to Boulogne in 7 hours. Now, why did you choose that particular route? What was it you were hoping to achieve? I'm sure it wasn't just picking up plastic along the way.
No, so there was, I suppose there was 2 strands of thinking behind this. I did my, I call it plastic patrol, on our waterways. So everything that I photographed, if I use that hashtag on social media, it pulls it into the map, and other people can do that as well, all over the world, which is great. So it was a way of developing that on our ocean. So I would take photos of every big piece of plastic that I saw out on the open water, which actually I did see a fair bit. But also I was taking water samples for microplastic analysis. So what I was really keen to do is I've highlighted this problem of big pieces of plastic on our inland waterways. It all starts in land, bags, bottles, wrappers, all that kind of thing, and eventually it flows out into our ocean and ends up in our seas. And when it does that, it starts to fragment and break down. It doesn't disintegrate, but it does get a lot smaller into what we call microplastics. So anything under about 5 millimeters is classed as a microplastic. And these are particularly harmful to our environment and to our wildlife, because often they mistake it for food and try and eat it, and they end up filling themselves up on plastics which they can't digest, and then they starve themselves because they can't eat any more food. So the plan really was to just collect samples of microplastics for analysis. So in that single journey, again, paddleboarding from England to France, every 5th mile I would take a water sample, which would basically mean dropping a net into the water, skimming just under the surface of the water, because that's where most of it congregates, and then bottling what I find, which goes off now for analysis at the University of Plymouth, so we can get an idea just from my journey, really, how much of the way of microplastics there was in the water.
So, having done the Channel now, you must have other goals. Where is Lizzie going to go next?
That's a really good question, and I'll be really honest, I don't have a bigger goal of where I'm going to go next. I don't have a big master plan of where I want to paddle and what I want to do. I suppose the immediate thing I'm looking at now is I'm organising a number of cleanups all over the UK this summer, sort of 15 locations, and I'm bringing paddleboards along and litter picks, and just completely free for everybody to come along and join. They can, I'll teach them to paddleboard, and in return they have to help do some plastic patrolling and litter picking with me. So that's, I suppose, the focus now, just trying to get more people, engaged with paddleboarding, because it's a sport that I absolutely love and I want it to be more accessible to everybody, but also just get people that are learning that sport to think about the environment a little more, and if they do take it up, doing so a bit more responsibly.
Well, we've heard that there are some amazing competitions and challenges in paddleboarding these days around the world. Has this made you competitive as well? Do you want to take up the sport in a competitive sense?
That's really interesting, because I have been thinking about this recently. So I was, before I went on my Channel crossing, I spent a day with a chap called Phil McCoy, who is the sort of the national sprint champion, and he does a lot of racing. And he was just kind of helping improve my technique for the Channel crossing, so that I was sort of conserving my energy as much as possible, and firing from different places when I started to fatigue and that kind of thing. And I actually mentioned to him that it would be quite interesting to maybe think about getting into some racing at some point. It's nothing I've ever done before, purely for fun, because I love paddleboarding, but watch this space, I'm not sure yet.
There's a new challenge for you, Lizzie, and we're going to watch this space, because we know that you're going to go on to more things here, and maybe take up new sports as well. You seem to be pretty adventurous.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's another thing I really I want to kind of explore. Other sports, exactly that. Like, it's not just about paddleboarding. I paddleboard because I love paddleboarding, and it's a great way for me to do my plastic patrolling, but I've always loved being outside. I've always loved adventure. I do a lot of other water sports now, so obviously now I'm better and I've got my health back. I want to do as much as I can, I suppose. Physically, I want to push myself and test myself in all sports. So yeah, see what happens.
What would be your message to women who may be listening, who've suffered from serious health problems, Lizzie, as you have done, and overcome them, and who maybe haven't been adventurous, haven't dared to try on a new sport or a new adventure like this, in terms of your biggest takeaways now from what you've achieved in this short time relatively? What would you say to other women?
I suppose it has, but I try not to dwell on that too much or think about it too much. I think you have to accept things that happen to you and move on from them, learn from them, but maybe not let them define you. I've never wanted what happened to me to be the definition of who I am. I wanted to achieve what I've achieved despite that. And I suppose, if anything, that's probably the message that I'd want to communicate, is that, it doesn't have to define who you are. You can go on and do, incredible things. But it is just sort of taking it slow and being hopeful, I suppose. Thinking positively is such a big part of it.
Absolutely, positive thinking. And I'm wondering if Lizzie Carr will ever return to the corporate world after this. Do you have to do a job to maintain your pursuit in paddleboarding now?
Do you know what? Never say never. I don't at the moment, which is great. But I do a lot of talks, and I definitely don't earn anywhere near as much money as I did in the corporate world, but I didn't ever quit my job thinking I would, and I accept that, and I'm quite happy with that. I'm not really too fussed. As long as I can afford to pay my bills, I'm all right. So don't ever. I in terms of going back to the corporate world, yeah, I don't think, no, I'll never do that, because you never know what might happen. Anything is around the corner. But I'd like to think I'll stay away as long as possible, doing what I love for as long as I can.
Well, you're clearly on a mission that you're passionate about, Lizzie, and having a lot of fun doing it as well. So we want to wish you the very best of luck with that, with those adventures and the environmental causes that you're supporting too along the way. You're doing a lot of good out there, Lizzie. So continued good health, and thank you for taking the time to come on the programme.
Thank you.
And you can find many more conversations like this and other sports on our website at wispsports.com. We have over 24 podcast shows, which are also available on iTunes. And whilst you're on the website, be sure to sign up for our newsletter and a chance to win a Cheetah Sports Bra. And you can also join in the conversation by following us on social media. Just look for Wisp Sports on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And you can also reach us here by emailing info@wispsports.com. Until the next time, thank you for listening.